Yeah, I think that probably being a bit younger potentially might have helped in a way in that regard as well, because I find that the older you get, the more entrenched we get with these fears. And it's the fears, whether it's a fear around making financial decisions, making a business move, or, even, personal life, relationships, that sort of stuff, that not taking risk and not exposing yourself to the potential downside. It's that comfortable, and our mind sort of wants to keep us in our safe little bubble. But those are the things that sort of stop you from living a bigger game, like playing a bigger game to having a bigger impact. Is that something that sort of you experienced at that time, or the fear, I mean, of things not working the way that you wanted, or is that something that's come over time as the game gets bigger, I suppose?
Yeah, it's definitely come over time. I mean, I think there were moments where I felt fears. So an example was to raise the initial seed capital. In the end, we put on a big black tie ball, and we managed to raise $100,000. We stood in front of about 500 or 600 people at the Hilton Hotel Grand Ballroom, and with literally a render that had been put together by an architect in Sydney, and promised everybody in the room, with the money that we raised tonight, we're going to be able to go over and build this school in Uganda. And I remember the first time I felt fear was actually going over to Uganda and thinking to myself, okay, so people have trusted me with their money. They've, entrusted confidence in me to be able to pull this off. I'm, by this stage, probably 22 years old, never built anything in my life, never purchased land. I'm in a foreign country. I'm a white woman. There were just so many sort of factors that were quite terrifying. But interestingly, again, the passion and the purpose led most of the decision making. And I guess now that the business is much bigger and we are, I guess, custodians of many children's futures, I'm much more risk averse. I'm much more careful with the sustainability and the decisions that I make about growth, and making sure that I measure, the ability to sustain the level of growth with the appetite for growth itself.
And how practically do you do that? Because I think that's applying sort of that risk management framework, but making sure that you're still having the impact and fulfilling your potential is something that applies to a foundation like yours. But it's also the same sort of things apply to people's financial decisions and decision making, and, as I mentioned, personal things like relationships. What's the framework that you use to tackle that today and find that balance between playing that bigger game and making sure that you're not overexposed?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's an interesting one because, as I sort of mentioned, I'm the custodian of other people's very kind donations, and these generous gifts people don't have to give me. And so I've got to be so careful, but I equally believe that a charity is just the same as any other business. So it needs to be run efficiently and effectively, and it needs to be run and managed really well. So the thing is about, I guess, the decisions that I make is I have to be slightly more conservative perhaps than a normal business, because I'm not, for example, investing people's money who can tell me what sort of level of risk appetite they want to take. But I guess, we've got a great board of directors, so we analyse risk constantly. We've got a really good risk framework, managing risk, but equally we're looking, for example, at our cash position and ensuring that we've got an appropriate amount of runway to manage the operations on an ongoing basis before we take that next leap of faith. So in the business, we've got a cash retention policy of 6 months of operations, but really we're running at the moment with 12 months of operations in the bank. And part of the reason why I did that was to safeguard us against a potential financial crisis or similar, which we've now, reached through a global pandemic, but also so that we can guarantee that we're going to be able to continue to fulfill the promises that we've made to our beneficiaries as well. So it's just a bit of, I guess, a tension between making sure that you can fulfill on your promises whilst also thinking about growth and continuing to kind of take those next steps towards, more educating more children, for example. I mean, that's the one thing that gets me out of bed every day. How can I educate more kids whilst doing it in a sustainable way so that we don't fall over?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Education. Yeah. And I guess the other thing is education is a long game. So that's the lens that I put on my decision making is we've got these kids with us for 18 years. So, you know, we've got to think about the fact that we've got to be able to service, you know, the children that we've got in our system for that period of time. And that's just the absolute minimum that we have them in our system for. So, you know, it's just making sure that the longevity and the future proof, you know, is always there, and that we're thinking, you know, conservatively enough to manage the risk, whilst also going, yeah, but there's more kids out there that we want to educate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you talk, I can apply almost exactly the same logic to how people manage their finances. And I think that having that that same, you need to have a level of protection, and there's like a target that you go, okay, great, I want 6 months worth of runway. For an individual, it might be, I want to cover my living expenses for X period of time or whatever. But I think that you need to be flexible so that when things, and clearly with what we're seeing at the moment, COVID disruption, financial market disruption, those sorts of things, that sometimes you need to extend that runway. Sometimes if you can contract it potentially, you know, if you're taking a considered decision around what's going on. But yeah, making sure that you're playing the long game to do the things for your business, for your financial security.
Absolutely. And I think just also, I mean, in a similar way to your personal finances, it's the investment in capital versus operations. You know, for us, it's, you know, the investment that we're going to need to build a school, for example, is quite a substantial one, in the same way as it would be, for example, if you were going to go and buy a house. So it's just managing that, and managing that cash flow really, and just managing in a way that you can sustain yourself for the long term.